think we've got a quorum that we need, so we'll go ahead and call to order the November 21st, 2019 Delta Protection Commission meeting. And to lead us this evening, Ms. Shelley Eckler, would you lead us in the pledge? Very good. Thank you for that. And I think as a reminder, Eric, I just want to make sure, so in order to speak and be heard, you need to press the button. If it's not green, you're not being heard.
That's correct.
All
Look
right.
for the green light, and then you can turn it off when you're done.
All right, just a reminder, and then, turn it off. So, to start us off, Madam Clerk, would you take the roll?
Chair Villegas,
Present?
Vice Chair Natoli is Commissioner Wynn.
Here.
Commissioner Burgess.
Here.
Commissioner Thompson.
Here.
Commissioner Cott.
Here.
Commissioner Van Lobenzels.
Here.
Commissioner Bush. Commissioner Sandine. And Commissioner Nomalini is not here yet. And Commissioner McElhenney.
Here.
And with a quorum has been reached with everybody called.
All right, very good. Well, congratulations, your first official act in front of the board successfully. You've called together a quorum. For those who may not know, Shelley Eckler was, hired about a month ago-ish, and so she will now serve as the commission clerk. Is that kind of the official title? Okay, well, welcome, and very good. Thank you very much. All right, and then also we have new commissioner member Dan McElhenney. Is that right? I want to get that right.
It's Dan McElhenney.
McElhenney, very good.
Yes, sir.
Okay, got to get that right. Get that pronounced. McElhenney. All right. So representing the State Transportation Agency, so Dan is the district director for Caltrans Region 10, which is in Stockton. Welcome. I know you've been sworn in. If you wanted to share a few words, a little history about yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Dan McElhenney. I'm representing David Kim, our Secretary of California State Transportation Agency. I'm really happy to be here. I have been with Caltrans for 32 years. Most recently, over the last 6 years till about a year ago, I had 6 years experience on the San Francisco Bay Conservation Development Commission as an assistant district director in the Bay Area. So I was glad to be a very active commissioner as part of BCDC. And I also led the toll bridge rehabilitation and seismic retrofit program for the last 16 years. So I know a lot about large bridges and small bridges across the Bay as well as through the Delta, particularly in Solano County. And then I'm currently, it's almost a year now I've been in the Stockton office, and I'm the steering committee chair for our Delta movable bridges. So our Stockton, our Marysville, and our Oakland office, we have a working group to improve the reliability of the Delta bridges. And I've led a lot of environmental team and environmental staff for projects over many years. So I look forward to bringing all this experience to the Delta Protection Commission.
Well, very good. Well, welcome. Sounds like the STA has appointed the right man for the job. So
Thank you.
All right. Yes, sir. Sure.
Obviously, he's in my district, but I just want to make a comment about Dan. He is an outstanding director. I mean, we've had outstanding Caltrans directors in District 10 since I've been there, but my point is that he has been phenomenal in regards to the homeless issue, which we're all dealing with, certainly with Freeway 99. He's also phenomenal with cleaning up the freeways, and he has crews out there all the time. So I just want to recognize his participation. He's everywhere that I go to, so he's very active, but I think he'll be an outstanding addition to this commission.
Perfect. All right. Welcome once again. All right, so that takes us to item 3, which is public comment. I don't have any slips to speak, so is there anybody here that wants to speak on items that is not on the agenda this evening? All right, seeing none, that takes us to item 4, which is the consent agenda, including the September 19, 2019 meeting minutes. Are there any questions or comments or a motion on the consent item? All right, we have a motion and a second by Commissioner Sandin.
And Mr. Chair, just to be clear, is this one vote on both items, the minutes and the 2020 meeting dates? And would any commission members like to talk about the proposed meeting dates in 2020? Or do you just want to do a single vote on minutes and then touch on the commission meeting dates for calendar year 2020?
Well, I'm assuming the way the motion, Commissioner Burgess, you wanted to include the consent agenda with,
Yeah, I looked at
and everybody's okay with the meeting dates? I'm assuming that would be the order. So that's the motion. I'm assuming there's still the second for that motion. So given that that's the case, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, so that motion carries unanimously. So that takes us to item 6 is the Executive Director's report. Erik?
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair and commission members. Your commission staff is kicking off work on the Great Delta Trail, our advisory committees. You might be aware that we received approval from the commission to embark on work with a consultant to begin preparation of the Great Delta Trail Master Plan. We're going to convene both our technical advisory committee, which are the local agency officials, and then the stakeholder advisory committee, which are stakeholders throughout the Delta region. First on December 4th at Solano County, and thanks to Commissioner Thompson and his staff for helping us arrange the use of their conference room there. That's the technical advisory committee, and the stakeholder advisory committee will be a December 5th evening meeting at Gene Harvey Community Center in the Delta. Moving on to the community design workshop, this is just an early heads up that commission staff will be holding a workshop again at the Gene Harvey Center on Saturday, January 11th. This is designed for Sacramento River Delta communities, especially those that have a more established Main Street. So Cortland, Isleton, Locke, and Walnut Grove would fall into that category. And it's an opportunity to discuss with interested parties in those communities challenges for their main streets, specific improvements that can be made. It's really a follow-up to the earlier work on the Delta Community Action Planning. And Commission Staff Planner Blake Roberts is our lead on that. Third item I wanted to report on, and I just got a report on this from Virginia Gardner, who is tracking it for us, the Delta Design and Construction Authority, or the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, the Joint Powers Authority that's planning the isolated Delta conveyance, met today. They previously appointed a stakeholder engagement committee. You all are probably familiar with that. They made another appointment to that committee today, a new member representing Solano County. And their next meeting of the stakeholder engagement committee is December 11th. Their first meeting was on November 13th. And they have a pretty aggressive set of meetings scheduled. We do have a couple of members of the audience. I see Jim Wallace here, who are members of that stakeholder engagement committee. And Mark Pruner will report on a presentation on that at the recent DPAC meeting as well. Yes.
The appointment from Solano, who ended up getting?
I'm told it's Tom Hardesty. And I said, is that Mike Hardesty? And Virginia
Mike.
assured me it's Tom Hardesty, so I didn't realize we had two
I'm sure it's
Hardestys.
Mike.
And okay, well, that made sense to me as well. So
Okay.
that's the report from the meeting that was held this afternoon. Welcome to the Delta sign installation, and if you have your commission meeting packets in front of you, there's an example of the graphic that will be on the Welcome to the Delta signs. We are working with Caltrans, Commissioner McElhenney, to obtain the encroachment permits to place these on Caltrans right-of-ways. We'll be working with the California Conservation Corps to install the signs. And there's a list of where those signs will be, at least countywide throughout the Delta region, 11 in total. And I hope that by the time we next meet, we'll be able to report, if not the installation of the first of the signs, at least the solid plan for when that will occur. Moving on to the fifth item, the commission was recognized at the Lodi Sandhill Crane Festival with the festival's Conservation Award. Hesitant to even touch it because it's so nice and I'll get my grubby fingerprints on it, but this was the award that was presented by the Sandhill Crane Festival. The commission's assistant executive director, Natasha Nelson, was there to receive it. I appreciate her attending. I was on a plane heading halfway around the world, so I wasn't able to be there, but it's a very nice recognition and it's a great festival.
There's a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner McElhaney.
First of all, that's a great award. Thank you
Yeah,
for presenting.
we were
us
pleased to
today.
receive it.
On the Delta sign installation, we have the encroachment permit, or we're waiting on the encroachment permit?
We're in the process of receiving the encroachment permits. I don't think we have any particular problem with them, but I'm glad that you're our new commission
I
member in
can-
case
I'll-
we do.
I'll check on that. Yeah, I'll check on that. And then who's making the signs, or when are the signs going to be here? It'd be nice to do an unveiling. is
Yeah,
what
I
was getting
agree.
to.
Actually, I'm glad you suggested that. That's a great idea. Can I ask our program manager, Melinda Dorin, if she's shepherding this project for us, and if she has an answer to those questions, that would be great.
So we submitted our first encroachment permit request last week, and once we know that that permit package is adequate to get the permit, then we'll bundle the other ones and we'll submit them all to the districts. So the district that we submitted to is up in Marysville for a sign out here in West Sac. And PIA will be making the sign. We already have a quote from them, so once their sign graphics are all completely done, they're gonna be slightly different depending on the location, so they'll be the same layout, but instead of a Sandhill crane, there might be a kayak and those signs went through the marketing task force. And so they've all been approved, and so we're just, in the process of submitting. We have, and the contract is being signed with the Consultation Board, so it's just, can't put the current force, so we're just waiting for all those things, we're shepherding through all at the same time.
Thank you. It's always great to have an unveiling ceremony of some type, even if it was here, but out on site is always fun too. And I'll make it a priority for District 3 Marysville. I used to work in Marysville and in Oakland and now in Stockton, so I know the Delta pretty well. And these are going to be fantastic once they're in place.
Well, we will be happy to do a tour even, I'm sure, when we get all of the, when we get them done.
Yeah, but I think the idea of an unveiling is a great idea, so I think we'll be
Commissioner Burgess?
bookmarking that.
Called, and I forget what the heritage. Yeah, will we have signage for that as well?
For the National Heritage Area? Yeah, ultimately there will be a whole, logo for that. And actually, are you looking at the logo that's on the
No, I was
map?
just
Or
looking at Welcome to the Delta. It'd be nice to say also underneath it.
we've noted that, and we don't have quite a resolution yet for how to introduce the concept. I think one idea with these signs is that you can add features later. It
Okay.
might be on maybe a magnetized,
something like
that
below or-
affixes to it.
Yeah.
But we're a little early now to be incorporating a logo for the National Heritage Area, but we'll certainly be there soon, and
Okay.
we want to make sure these signs recognize that as well.
Thank you.
Moving on, thank you, Melinda. Moving on, the Delta Recreation Map. This is in front of all of you. You don't have to open yours, so I'll open mine, but this is a joint project the Commission has worked on with the Delta Conservancy, and it just highlights public recreation features throughout the Delta. There's no private facilities in here, but we're developing a plan for how to distribute the printed copies that we have of that document. Moving on, tomorrow we'll be kicking off the 5th version of our Delta Leadership Program. This year we have 20 participants in the 5th version of the Delta Leadership Program. Chair Villegas will be there tomorrow to help welcome the participants. Following tomorrow's day-long seminar from 5 to 7 p.m., there will be a welcome reception for our participants that'll be in downtown Sacramento. If any of you find yourselves in downtown Sacramento or could find yourself in downtown Sacramento tomorrow, it would be wonderful if you could drop by even for just a moment to meet some of our participants. And then just a reminder, and for you to mark your calendars, the final seminar will be at Bogle Winery in Clarksburg on Friday, March 13th. And that will also there will also be a concluding reception there. We'll be sending out reminders of that as we get closer to the date, but we'd love it if you could mark your calendar and plan to join us for that. It was a pretty light couple of months with land use, which has been the case for the last several commission meetings, but we did provide a letter on the Sacramento Area Council of Governments Sustainable Communities Strategy. Attached to my executive director report in the meeting packet is an update on our website and social media metrics. Those are pulled together by Stacy Hayden, our information officer, and it's interesting to see where people's attention falls with commission social media posts and also our website. And then again, to repeat Chair Villegas's welcome, we're really pleased to welcome Shelley Eckler. She's our new commission clerk, executive secretary on our staff. She joined us in October from our landlord, Ramco Properties. We stole a staff member from our landlord. That's pretty cool.
You're cutting the rent too? They raised it. They raised it because you stole it.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say, they're going to raise it.
Shelley's a West Sacramento resident, and she's also an avid Delta boater. So if you're out on Delta waterways, look for her out there. And then finally, we have our usual list of upcoming events in my report, and also a snapshot of where we are with 4+ months into, is that right? August, September, October. 5 months into our fiscal year, where we stand with our commission budget and our expenditures. And then finally, I wanted to mention, on a bit of a sad note, note the passing of Charles Warren. And some of you might be wondering who is Charles Warren, a former member of the legislature, but the commission would know him as the head of the State Lands Commission at the time that the Lands Commission prepared its public trust report for the Delta, which was the impetus for Senator Johnston to introduce the what became the Delta Protection Act of 1992. I was fortunate to meet Charles a long time ago on a whole entirely different matter. He's just a really gracious and wonderful man. Worked at the federal level under the Carter administration, actively involved here in the state of California, and he passed about a month ago. So I just wanted to mention that, someone who was important to the early days of the commission. And with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
All right. Are there any questions of anything Eric just shared with us on his report? I don't have any slips to speak on the item. Anybody here to comment on Eric's report? All right, seeing none, I did want to take the opportunity, because we don't have a standing location on the agenda for commissioner reports or information that needs to be shared with the rest of the commission, and because I represent the Delta Stewardship Council by way of serving as chair of this commission, I wanted to start, and we can figure out where it fits in the agenda, but there's no good place this evening, so I figured on the heels of the executive director's report, I wanted to share a few things that I think are pertinent, that are important for the rest of this commission to know in light of some of the things that are transpiring on the Delta Stewardship Council, much of what Skip's familiar with because he served last year, and Vice Chair Natoli will be serving next year, and so, or the year after. But in any case, I wanted to just take 2 minutes to share some of the things that we discussed in addition to this afternoon's meeting, a meeting a month ago. So things that I think are relevant. So the Stewardship Council received an update today, as you may know, if you're following the agenda, some of the work that we're doing on the climate action, vulnerability and assessment and adaptation strategy. That work is a significant lift for the Stewardship Council. So, Staff person Harriet Ross provided us kind of an update on the work that's happening there. If you're interested in more, I can share that with you, but essentially, that's going to be a heavy lift relative to climate change and all the things affecting the Delta. So there is not only an assessment of what's happening relative to climate change, but also an adaptation strategy to follow. So we get an update on the status of the work that's happening there. We also are undertaking a consolidation, in large part, an initiative to consolidate a lot of the science funding. That conversation started about a year ago. It's now in full swing, and we received an update from staff on what they anticipate that consolidated science funding and the governance actions relative to that, and what the plan might look like for next year. So we received information from staff on that item as well this afternoon. And then other ministerial stuff, but that's not super exciting. But I did want to share also that we received, in light of the Delta Levy Investment Strategy, which if you're tracking, that's been a huge contentious issue for several years. We received the very first annual report to the Delta Stewardship Council by the State Department of Water Resources, a summary of kind of how they're spending their Delta Levy investment funds. It's the first time we've ever received something like this, so it was a good opportunity for the commission or the council to sort of compare and contrast, if you will, how this document in terms of the 2018-2019 funding compares to what the Delta Levy investment prioritization looked like that was approved last year. And so it's the first sort of opportunity to see how all the work that was started a couple years ago is now coming into play. And then one last thing I'll share with the commission, a copy of the Delta Plan 5-year review highlights. Many of us were involved in this conversation, and that is a statutory requirement that the Delta Plan receive a review every 5 years. This is in part the summary of what the work that was undertaken. And the reason I wanted to bring it is because, again, as my responsibility in representing this body on the Stewardship Council, nobody's going to remember this, but the letter that we sent to the Stewardship Council asked that as part of the 5-year review, that the Stewardship Council continue to engage with the Delta Protection Commission as it relates to Delta as place, and that has been embedded as part of the review. And so on the very back page, bottom right-hand blue bullet, you'll notice in progress the continued engagement. And so that's been a point of a lot of conversation with staff during the review of the 5-year review of the plan. So anyhow, I just wanted to share that information. Are there any questions at all? Yes, everybody told.
Yeah, thank you, Oscar, for sharing and certainly for your work on behalf of the commission and all those that we represent. I wanted to ask a couple questions to your report. One on the consolidation of the science efforts. Is there an appropriate role for this commission either to hear an update, to engage in that, to comment on that, on what the implications may or may not be to that, upsides, downsides? It seems to me that that's important from a lot of respects. There's a lot of resources being and have been dedicated and devoted to that effort that informs us and as decision makers, but also obviously agencies up and down the whole ladder. And so I guess my question is, and certainly for you and for Erik and for anybody else, is if that is, then maybe we got to get that agendized and weigh in, and certainly to assist you in your work as chair of this commission and representing the commission as it relates to that and conversations that are taking place, I assume at the staff levels, but it sounds like the council's going to hear that. So I'm interested to hear your feedback on that.
Yeah, I think it's certainly appropriate. I've raised the issue with Erik about, kind of keeping track of what that means. As you'll know, and Skip can attest to, the Stewardship Council is very heavily reliant on science. I mean, that's a significant portion of the work that happens through that body. And so this initiative, in short, yes, I think it's going to bleed over into the work that we do, and so I think it certainly would be appropriate. And I would defer to Erik in terms of sort of communicating a request that we hear kind of where that's headed and what the 2020 year looks like in terms of rolling that initiative out, because it's now in full swing. It actually is being driven in part by the DPAC, which is a 17-member, goodness sakes, I can't even remember how many members are part of the DPAC. That's a part of the Stewardship Council's responsibility. And so that's a state and federal, largely a state and federal agency body that is taken the lead, if you will, on that consolidated science initiative. So it might, I think the staff are one and the same, so I'm not sure, Eric, if you have thoughts about how that might surface itself.
No,
to
I
this
think
body.
that could make a great agenda item for the next commission meeting. And the Chair Villegas drew my attention to that. I missed the DPIC meeting. That's when I was traveling, but I want to get acquainted with the discussion on that item. I haven't been able to do it yet, but I will in the coming days.
Yeah, because I would just weigh in that experience would tell me that certainly, having resources available, but how those resources are directed, because obviously that science requires resources for the folks that are doing it, conducting it, coordinating it, publishing it, and if they don't have the resources, or if they go in different directions. And I guess I'd just be very curious. Again, coordination is good. You don't want a redundant effort, but if nothing else, what little I understand about the science part of it is that that evolves with further research, with further information, with ongoing study, monitoring, and all the elements that go into it. And I think it's important, certainly the mission of what we're charged with here, but I think also, knowing more about that. I guess I would just leave it at that for right now. And so, again, I appreciate the feedback, and maybe in the early part of next year, because I don't know what sort of track it's on for whatever adoption or consolidation vote is going to be required and agency approval, but I want to make sure we get our voices, included in all that before somebody makes a decision on it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Any thoughts or any other thoughts or comments on that item? So that Eric, you'll surface that as.
And can we get a copy of the I assume it's online, but the Delta Levy investment study, maybe Eric, you can circulate that to everybody. I think it's important. And put it on our website, I think, too. I think it's important because, again, we're a resource for folks that may look to the commission, and if that's up, it's not our body of work, but I think it's important for folks to, find access, through the commission's information.
Yeah, and one final point on that, and I know, Skip, again, you can chime in at any point, but there was a lot of work, it was a huge lift. It was a huge lift for Skip and others.
Trying to go a cappella. He wants you to
together-
join in. He wants a little duet here.
He's not missing it at all. The prioritization of the Delta Levy investment strategy as it was finalized in 2018 offered or allowed the opportunity for a variance from DWR in terms of how it funds what the levy priorities are. And what this report shows is that there are a lot of, the list was not taken verbatim as identified by the Stewardship Council. This report shows, and a good graphic illustrates it, so you don't have to read the whole thing. It shows that there's a lot of variance and explains why. And that was the requirement was if you're going to deviate from what the priorities are, you need to explain why. And so Mr. Chernell did a good job of explaining why and how it is, and so it's a good report, and there was praise for it. So, all right. There are no other comments on that. Then we move on to Mr. Pruner. I know you're ready to go. So a DPAC report by Mr. Mark Pruner, Chair of the DPAC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
My microphone's on.
No, it just needs to be turned on.
apparently I didn't have this class in school. Okay, turn it on. Thank you very much, Blake. Before I begin, I want to, if I could tag on to what Erik said earlier, I want to thank Erik for coming out on Tuesday to Clarksburg. And the commission has been very supportive of the old schoolhouse, 1883 schoolhouse project. And we were able to actually move that thing on Tuesday morning. It's amazing how much effort it took to move it a block with trees and cutting and PG&E and Frontier and lines dropping and raising, and Channel 3 was out there and did a nice little quick piece on it. And thank you very much to the commission for your support It's now on the piece of dirt where it's going to go. There's a lot more steps, but now everybody's thinking you got an actual project now. So it's very helpful, and we couldn't have done it without your support. Thank you very much. We met last week and heard Mario Muzo, the deputy for BOR, gave us a really long report about the consolidated water operations in the Delta, coordinating between the SWP and the CVP. And I learned that 6 million acre-feet of water are moved by the federal folks through the Delta every single year. I also learned that because the biological opinions having just come out, the record decision they think is going to come out in January. That's a really big date. When that ROD comes out, it triggers a lot of other events, namely lawsuits, etc. So I'm sure there's going to be some engagement with that. We also learned that because of the act sponsored by Garamendi, the requirement that the Reclamation and the Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, among others, NIMS, etc., use real-time data and real-time science, not artificial dates, to operate the cross channels and to do what they're required to do under the Endangered Species Act and other acts, that now new issues come up with the question of wear and tear on the Delta cross-channel gates. So they're conducting a study on that. Never occurred to me that, okay, these things go up and down, that makes sense, but didn't think about what's going to happen to the hinges, the edges, will those gates seal when they're closed, all of that. So one issue leads to another, but we had a really good discussion, and it was really helpful, frankly, to have the federal folks come and begin a little bit of the transparency that, in my opinion, has been not present for such a long time. He was open. The questions that he allowed to be asked were helpful. We even had a nice little footer in one of the pages that said subject to attorney-client privilege, which they forgot to remove. So he said, oh, that was a mistake. But so we got the feeling we were looking at an insider, slightly maybe colored draft, but it was good information. So we hope to continue that, and when there's substantive information, bring that back to the commission. We also spent a fair amount of time talking or listening to a presentation by Jim Wallace, who is here. Jim's the president of the Delta Legacy Communities, a relatively new group that is an organization that is, I think, doing really well to represent the legacy communities in the Delta as a group, consolidating their concerns and putting forward those concerns in an organized way through the Stakeholder Engagement Committee with the DCA. They met one time. I think if I can summarize what I heard Jim say is there's a lot of organizational stuff, not too much meat, but the anticipation is at the December 11 meeting, there will be some meat. And we committed to work with Erik and to do our best to recommend to the commission ways that the commission might become better engaged in that process. I'm thinking that's going to be somewhat of a live action firing exercise. It's going to move fast, it's going to be hot and heavy, there's going to be a massive amount of material that comes out, and our goal is to engage folks in the Delta as best we can to assist the commission in whatever letters and whatever action that the commission might deem appropriate to engage in that process. It has the potential to change everything. And I know Erik's committed also to work very hard and very diligently in that project. So we don't know yet what's going to come out of the process, but I think it'll be massive, whatever it is. So we want to be pre-positioned to engage in that fully. That is all I have to report.
Any questions of Mark's report? Supervisor Natoli.
Yeah, not so much on Mark's report, but I think that, and it may be helpful to Erik as well, that and certainly appreciate the report out on the stakeholders group, but I think that, what latitude and or direction, again, Erik, we meet, every 8 weeks or so, and if Mark and Jim are correct that this is going to get fast and furious, it doesn't give you much time to sort of touch back with the full commission, let alone I obviously can work with the chair and others, but, so I don't know, I think, certainly in thinking this through and recognizing that, the commission's discussion regarding conveyance over time, our position that we've taken in previous iterations of that, and then I guess, importantly, the role of the stakeholders, which still formulates around the I guess, assumption or presumption that there will be a isolated conveyance of some sort. That's what the DCA was formed for. That's what they're working towards, yet undefined as to what that might look like at the end product. Again, not being pre-decisional, but the DCA, that's their mission. And so I guess from the standpoint certainly of Erik's role, recognizing the makeup of this commission, I think in fairness to him and to staff, what that means for him. So I guess I'd like to maybe, whether it's appropriate now or to have some discussion, but so you're not putting too much of a squeeze box without at least knowing, what commissioners think about that. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there needs to be some thoughtful consideration given to when you speak of engagement. This body has not taken a position on that, and in light of what Vice Chair Natoli has indicated, engagement could take on a life of its own, right? I mean, I think there's been a lot of attempts to try to engage folks. They now have appointed representatives. I think there's a 20-member body of the Stakeholder Subcommittee Engagement Committee. I can't remember exactly how it's called. So I'm, as you mentioned that, I'm thinking, okay, do we need to have a conversation about what we, as a body, because this is not our first bite at this apple, and so I think the conversation probably needs to happen. In fairness to you, Mark, because otherwise you may hear it differently from members of this body in terms of the degree of engagement and the type of engagement and where those, what the dial looks like and where those push points are. So,
if I could comment to that, I did neglect earlier to say the Stakeholder Engagement Committee will be tracking that process. I mean, we're not officially a part of it, even as an ex officio member, even though, public agencies were encouraged to apply to be ex officio members. I didn't really see the benefit to being officially affiliated with that committee, but we certainly plan to follow it carefully. I think by the time the commission meets on January 16th, and by the way, that meeting will be in Oakley, that we're going to know more about what isolated conveyance means under this administration. So this probably will be a more detailed agenda item in January. I'm assuming that we'll know more in terms of DWR's environmental analysis. We're told that they're going to kick off a notice of preparation process here shortly. And so that probably will signal what they intend to do with proposed projects. So it probably makes sense to put this on the agenda in January and go into more detail about what that means. We'll also have the benefit of another meeting of the Stakeholder Engagement Committee advising the Design and Construction Authority. And I think this next meeting will start to see what that group is being asked to do. My understanding from the first meeting is that it was largely going through process, how does the Brown Act work, getting acquainted with each other, and I think probably a more meaty agenda will be on tap for December 11th.
Yeah.
So if that sounds okay, I would propose that we have a lengthier discussion in
I think we're just concerned
January.
about things getting in front of us and all of that, so I just want to make sure that we're
Yeah,
lined up properly. So
well,
that it
and
reflects
frankly,
the
this I
commission.
mean, the JPA, the Design and Construction Authority, they have outlined a pretty aggressive set of steps. I mean, they're talking about getting engagement from this committee over the span of about 5 months, and then that's it. And meeting every other week. And so I don't think a lot is going to happen before we meet in January, but it might be appropriate at that time to talk about, what can and should the commission be doing, recognizing that our meetings are generally every other month and things might be progressing on a more rapid schedule than that, at least for the first part of 2020.
Yeah, we might want to plan for the time to really be able to dig into that.
Yeah, but I can tell you that we certainly stand ready, just as we did with BDCP and with Cal Water Fix, we stand ready to review those environmental documents and submit substantial comments on them in as much as they continue to affect delta values. And I don't see how they could avoid affecting delta values, but we've been told there's a renewed commitment to recognizing that there needs to be a better effort to protect and enhance delta agriculture and recreation and heritage. And we'll see whether that's embedded within the environmental document or not.
All right, Chuck?
This is really more of a just a technical question, Mark. When BOR talked about the flows in the delta as far as 6,000 acre feet, was there any discussion at all about the condition of the aqueduct? Because my counterparts in the valley have been concerned, especially your Avenal, in regards to the subsidence of 2 feet, which has reduced the maximum flow to about 80% capacity. Was there any talk at all about any kind of maintenance or restoration of the aqueduct in the valley?
My recollection is no.
That's a hint.
There we go. Is that on? My recollection is no. The related question that I asked had to do with silt buildup over time and dredging, and what's that going to mean in terms of flood protection. And I kind of got a non-answer answer to that. Like, we need to study more. We're not sure. There's issues, et cetera, et cetera. But to your point, I don't recall any discussion, especially in the system south of the Delta. This is all very Delta-centric. That's
Right.
his office, and he was focused only on that.
Okay, good.
I'm sure that, I'm looking at what I have here in my hand it's like a printout of a PowerPoint presentation that we all received, and I'm sure if any of the commission members want to see that, Eric, I know, has copies in color. It's a little sterile apart from the commentary that we received, but at least it gives some information.
Good.
Sorry, that's a
It's okay.
non-answer as well to your
Just
question.
curious. I'm interested to find out where we are.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. And
Yep.
thank you for your comments on that other
Yeah.
point. In fulfilling our responsibility to bring forward timely,
Right.
thoughtful, and constructive thoughts and recommendations to this group, I feel a little level of worry here because of how fast things are going to go. There's the holidays and other issues and calendar, and I'm not sure that's all going to pan out exactly. But
Yeah. No, that's a
so we're
challenge.
going to
and-
try to figure
yeah.
that out and deliver something to you, and
Right.
so you in a timely way. I hope, given the speed.
Right. Yep. Commissioner Tillman?
One other question, so, to the aggressive time schedule, so how is it in 20 weeks' time? I think they're gonna get the answers to your point, Eric, about the values, when we've been talking about a lot of these things for decades, and your project impacts, obviously, but looking at how you can, minimize impacts or damage to delta values. And I guess I'm a little puzzled, whoever it is doing it, DC in this case, but how in 20 weeks' time, meeting every other week, which it may equate to 8 or 10 meetings, that in taking some of the best and brightest of folks that represent delta interests along with other interests, that they think that's going to get to some point where it answers the question. I guess I'm puzzled with that, and maybe that's just because my experience tells me that you don't get magic answers. You don't get magic answers, but you don't get them in 20 weeks either. And so I guess I'm just not to be overly critical or skeptical about it, but I guess I find that hard to believe.
I think that's totally valid. And at the end of the day, is this just going to be another checkbox? Say we check in with folks and they really didn't have any comments and off we go? And is the answer to that going to be, well, yeah, you gave us 1,000 pages to read in 1 week and expected us to provide substantive comments? That's unreasonable. So we're dealing with a lot of unknowns here, and I just know my job at this point is to try to tee up the topic and express the concerns and make a commitment to move forward, and that's all
Appreciate it.
I
Thanks,
feel I
Mark.
can do at this point. So anyway, thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. All right, that takes care of item 7. Item 8 is the Delta Protection Commission's tribal consultation policy. So Melinda, you're presenting this item. And I don't have any items or any slips to speak on this item, so.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Again. The state of California recognizes the right of Native American tribes to self-govern, and Governor Jerry Brown had issued an executive order B-1011 when he was governor. And the Natural Resources Agency in 2012 developed a policy, and we have worked under that policy. So that's been our umbrella policy since that tribal policy was implemented. But due to recent planning efforts that the Commission has undertaken, large projects with the California Great Delta Trail, the Heritage Area, and the Land Use Plan, and some other projects, staff is recommending that we adopt a policy for our planning efforts. And the policy was part of the September packet before you. It has not changed since then. I did send the policy out to all of the tribes on our list. I emailed it out so they had electronic copies. I did make phone calls. We did receive some responses. We received one response from a tribe that was related more to ground disturbing activities, and this policy is more for planning. And so that was more mitigation approach for monitoring and things like that. So we didn't update the policy in response to that. We also did receive another comment just updating contact information, things, which is nice to receive that because then it's not going into that they're getting it. And so, but we didn't get any substantive comments. And so the policy before you is the same policy that was in the September packet. And I'm happy to answer questions on it. And yes, staff would recommend that the Commission adopt the policy for staff to implement.
Okay, so this is an action item then? Right, so we've had it since September. There were no comments in September. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Or is there a motion to adopt as presented by staff? All right, we have a motion by Skip. So, all right, we have a second by Commissioner Ott. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right, thank you very much.
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you, Melinda. Thank you. Right, then item 9, let's see, is the report on the NHA activities. And I know, Eric, you had indicated you wanted to do some advance work on part of this, and you didn't get a chance to do that. So how do you want to take items A and B? Is that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, A and B, and then we were prepared to ask you to appoint a subcommittee, and on further reflection about that, I don't think we quite need to do that tonight,
Okay.
and I also was negligent in reaching out. I caught one commissioner coming in the door this evening, but I was negligent to reach out to commissioners to inquire whether they might be willing to serve on that subcommittee.
Okay.
So I think that can probably wait until January for you to appoint a subcommittee, but we are definitely interested in working with a subset of the commission just to give us flexibility to spend a little more time and hash out things, more time than is normally allowed during a pretty restricted meeting agenda for our every other month meetings of the full commission. And then it also gives us a little more flexibility to act in between commission meetings if that's so, if the full commission, grants that power to the subcommittee.
Got it. Okay. Well, actually, it's timely that you just explained that because that gives anybody who wants to be a part of the subcommittee an opportunity to hear Blake's presentation on what they would be a subcommittee to. And so, but we are, yes, so sell, that's right. So if nobody
No pressure. No.
So if nobody volunteers, it's because your presentation didn't sell it. So, all right. No pressure. Yeah, no. All right, Blake, you're
Okay.
on.
Well, Chair Villegas, members of the commission, my name is Blake Roberts. I'm a senior environmental planner for the commission, and I'm lead on Delta Heritage and on the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta National Heritage Area. For over 10 years, Senator Feinstein, Congressman Garamendi, and the Commission have pursued federal designation of the Delta as a National Heritage Area. Finally, in March of 2019, legislation formally establishing the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta National Heritage Area, or NHA, and designating the Commission as the local coordinating entity finally was passed. And so we're really pleased to be talking about this tonight and talking about the next steps we'll be taking. So one of the Commission's first steps is going to be developing a management plan. And we have to develop the management plan within 3 years of designation. So that would be March of 2022. The management plan is required to include comprehensive policies, recommendations, and strategies, a resource inventory, an interpretive plan, and also an implementation and funding program. So in the most recent state budget in fiscal year 2019-2020, we received a one-time appropriation of $200,000 for the Commission to begin work on the management plan, including preparation of a workload analysis, project charters, vision statement, and project plans for each component of the management plan. After the Commission approved a scope of work at its May meeting, Commission staff solicited proposals from potential consultants. The Commission released a request for proposal in early October, and eventually we received 3 proposals by our November 7th deadline. Staff reviewed the proposals and selected Point Heritage Development Consulting. Point Heritage is located outside of California, but staff believe that the team members' deep experience with other NHAs would be a valuable asset and could provide great insight into the preparation of the program and the management plan. Particularly with, they have a lot of insight into governance and the funding strategies. The proposed scope of work is focused on the management plan process, but does not require much public interaction, and so we felt that it wasn't imperative that there be a local consultant selected. The other 2 firms are located in California and have experience with projects in the state, but do not have experience in national heritage areas. Point Heritage's bid is $149,000 and $400. Let me say that again. $149,400 and exceeds the $100,000 maximum contract delegation authority for the executive director. Therefore, we need the Commission approval to move forward with awarding a contract. We are requesting that the Commission authorize the executive director to offer, negotiate, and execute an agreement, a contract not to exceed $149,400 with Point Heritage Development Consulting. Once a contract is in place, we anticipate that Point Heritage will be developing work products over a 6 to 9 month period. In the meantime, Commission staff will be proceeding with several initiatives as part of the National Heritage Area, and this is something that a subcommittee could be working with us on. First, we'll be working with the National Park Service on completing a cooperative agreement and a work plan. Second, we will be reaching out, we've already been reaching out, but we will be continuing to reach out to state agencies, local governments, communities, and nonprofit organizations in the Delta and Carquinez Strait to discuss the NHA program and management plan. Third, we will be developing a partnership program that will eventually include organizations such as chambers of commerce, educational institutions, historical societies, and museums. Fourth, we will be working on a marketing strategy, including a website, social media, and other marketing pieces. Fifth, we will be conducting research on best practices at other national heritage areas and similar heritage organizations through participation in the Alliance of National Heritage Areas and field visits. And finally, we will be engaged in heritage preservation and economic development projects that we've already been doing already, such as the Delta Heritage Forum, Delta Anthology, driving and walking tours, and the signs that we were talking about tonight. So with that, I think I'll move over to Erik. I know we were going to talk about the subcommittee, but I'm not quite sure if you have anything to add to
Actually,
the
Commissioner
presentation.
Natoli has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm like, question that I have is that the name of the firm is Point Heritage?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and where are they out of?
There's team members that are spread throughout the East Coast. There's one in Florida, one in Tennessee, and one in Tennessee. Sorry, One in Pennsylvania, I mean.
And so nobody west of the Mississippi.
Nobody west of the Mississippi. But one of the things I will say is that the people that are involved have extensive experience with NHAs. In fact,
No,
one,
I get it. I appreciate
No,
that. So,
sure.
so I'm not questioning the credentials or,
Mhm.
just physical locality isn't the only driver here. But so with that, certainly experience with national heritage areas, but does their bid include quite a bit for travel? Are they actually going to come here? Is it all going to be done remotely? Again, we have expertise with you and Erik and staff, and obviously with the committee and folks we're going to be working with. But I don't want to be chewing up a lot of dollars ever how this is being funded by having folks having to fly out here all the time. Are they going to establish a presence for the duration of the project? And we don't have that in front of us, obviously, because of the short time frame here. So I have no idea what that looks like, and I'm not questioning staff's recommendation. That's not what I'm asking here. But I want to get some understanding, because I want to make sure the value, but certainly what the work product that, and again, I have confidence in what you bring us, that you believe this is the right party to work with. But there's nothing, there was no reading in advance, so I'm asking questions that maybe should be self-evident, but it's not. So I guess that's my reason for my question. So.
If I could step in, I think the question's entirely appropriate. Specifically to answer the question, a limited number of trips are included in their budget to California, but we will see them out here in California on a few occasions. It's true that most of this work can be done remotely, and I think would even be done remotely from the Bay Area if we had selected one of the two California-based consultants. It's worth noting two things. One, the depth and breadth of their experience with a range of NHAs throughout the country is really impressive with this group. And I was particularly impressed by one of the team members who actually currently runs a National Heritage Area. I guess he's got some free time in his schedule. But that one has been wildly successful at attracting hundreds of millions of dollars to their NHA. And not to say that our Delta NHA is going to be all about economic development, but I'm really intrigued, and I would imagine stakeholders in the Delta would be intrigued by the potential to have a focus on economic development for this NHA. That's certainly one model that Blake and I learned about when we got to meet with colleagues in New Mexico last month. I'm very intrigued by that as kind of a model for what this National Heritage Area might be. The other model is really focused more on highlighting the history and the historic features and the true heritage. Maybe a blend of the two is where we ultimately end up. But that was very intriguing to me. And the other thing that was really noteworthy is that these consultants, their hourly rate is much lower than the California-based firms. And so combining all of that together, it's not ideal. I think we'd always want someone that we know we can go down the road and see in person, but factoring all that into account, and three of us reviewed these proposals and met and scored them, and we were of unanimous mind that this was the right entity for us to work with.
Can I just, one other question, and again, I was not questioning the staff recommendation or the thoroughness of your review. So, did they put forth beyond their I guess, extensive knowledge and development of management plans and even operating overseeing a National Heritage Area, what about their understanding, and again, they'll be dependent in some part or good part on us, what was their understanding about the Delta? I mean, this place is unique to any place in the whole world as far as I'm concerned.
Very limited.
Okay.
Which could be a drawback or it could be
Yeah.
an advantage.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly debated that one in my own mind back and forth. I think you can make an argument that, someone who doesn't come in with real preconceived notions of what the Delta region is might be just what we need.
Okay.
I mean, certainly they'll have an opportunity to get acquainted with the features on the ground, and they know what to be looking for, so they're going to come in a little more prepared than the average bear to be looking for what they need to find out. But yeah, there's no doubt about it. They do not have any specific background in the Delta. Their sole California involvement was working on a Route 66 related heritage project down in Southern California. So they're completely fresh to the region. It's worth noting that the teams that were California-based, and one team in particular, their firm has deep Delta experience, but working on Delta isolated conveyance. I don't think that's a problem because it's different personnel, and frankly, I think that could be a benefit to our NHA, but just the lack of the NHA experience and understanding clearly showed in the proposals for the two California-based firms.
Yeah, I was just wondering, were these just paper-based submissions that you're reviewing? No in-person interviews or anything?
Yeah, just reviewed the proposals. We did not interview the teams in person.
Any other questions regarding staff's recommendation? I had the same questions. We spoke a little bit about it. I would offer to whatever motion we end up with a slight amendment to say, and I know you're going to make sure that this works out perfectly because you've invested the full 10 years that it took to get to this point. So Blake, I would ask, and Eric, maybe consider putting together some sort of a timeline when whatever you guys feel is comfortable with some deliverables, right? Because this is a 2-year contract. There's no extension beyond the 2022 date. We have to have a management plan in place, and this is the only shot we get at it. We're spending all the money that we have available to us. So it's one chance. So I, as a commission member, would prefer to know what the deliverables are in whatever form you're comfortable with, to know we're incrementally getting to our very clear objective. So if everybody's okay with that.
Is that something you'd like us to talk about now? I mean, I'm a little challenged to talk about the specific deliverables, and now I'm going to put Blake on the spot here to see if he can.
I mean, if you give me,
reel it off the
for
top
me,
of
if
his
you say
head,
I
but-
can do that, then I'm good. I don't need any more than that. I don't want to micromanage, but unless there are other questions or comments about it. But if you're comfortable with it in creating whatever gives you comfort and ensuring that we're getting to where we need to be as we go through 2021 and March of 2022,
And they will be operating on a much condensed time schedule. I believe the intention is for them to be completing their work within 9 months.
Even
So they're going to hit the ground running and be working hard on this in the coming months.
And that's the idea, is that this would give us the framework we need.
All right. All right, so you're looking for a motion to give you the authority, Eric, to execute the contract in the amount not to exceed $150,000?
That's correct.
Right. So we have a motion by Commissioner Natoli and second by Commissioner Burgess. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So that motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, good work. Thank you. All right, so then that takes us to item 10, which is closed session. So I've been instructed to, before we go to closed session, remind everybody that the next commission meeting will take place on January 16th in Oakley.
Yay.
Yep, so that'll be a hop, skip, and a jump for you.
I'll welcome you all to Oakley.
Open arms. All right, so that's where the next meeting will be. And then, so we're gonna call for a 5-minute break, because I think staff wants to clear the room, because we are gonna go into closed session to discuss. It might end up that way. And then we're going to be discussing a performance review of our executive director. So
Don't take it personally.
I cannot, but.
all right, so we'll reconvene in 5 minutes.